My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you what happened in the Appalachian Mountains last October. The authorities called it a tragic camping accident, but I know the truth. I know what's really out there in those ancient hollows. It started as a simple weekend getaway. My college friends Jake, Emma, and David had planned this trip for months. We were going to hike the old Cherokee trails near Pisgah National Forest, the same trails my grandfather had warned me about as a child. Stay on the marked paths, he'd whisper, his weathered hands shaking as he spoke. The mountains remember everything, and some things are better left sleeping. I should have listened. We arrived at the trailhead Friday evening, October 13th. Yeah, I know how that sounds now, but at the time we just laughed about it. The parking area was eerily empty for a weekend, but David insisted it meant we'd have the wilderness to ourselves. The first sign something was wrong came as we hiked deeper into the forest. Emma, who was studying folklore at Appalachian State, kept pointing out strange markings carved into the trees. Not typical trail blazes, these were older, deeper. Symbols that looked almost like warnings. Local legend says these mountains are full of haints, she explained, running her fingers over a particularly deep carving. Spirits of Cherokee who died during the Trail of Tears, coal miners who never made it out of collapsed shafts, moonshiners who disappeared into the hollers. Jake scoffed. Just old superstitions. But I noticed how quiet the forest had become. No bird songs. No rustling of small animals. Just the whisper of wind through bare branches and our footsteps on the leaf-covered trail. Sound, sudden branch snap, jump scare. We all froze. The sound had come from directly behind us, loud and deliberate. But when we turned, nothing was there except the empty trail stretching back toward the parking area. Probably just a deer, David said, but his voice was tight. We pressed on, though I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel of shadows that grew darker with each step. By the time we reached our planned campsite, a small clearing beside a creek, the sun was already setting behind the ridgeline. That's when we found the first body. It was partially hidden under a pile of leaves near the creek bank. At first glance, it looked like driftwood or an old log. But Emma's scream cut through the mountain air as she realized what we were looking at. The skeleton was old, decades, maybe longer. Tattered remnants of clothing still clung to the bones. A rusted mining helmet sat nearby, and a corroded name tag read J. Morrison, 1952. We need to call the police, I said, fumbling for my phone. No signal. Of course. David was already examining the remains. Look at this, he said, pointing to the skull. Those aren't natural breaks. He was right. The skull showed clear signs of trauma, crushing blows that had caved in the back and sides. This man hadn't died in a mining accident. He'd been murdered. The sound echoed across the mountains, long and mournful. But it didn't sound like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more human somehow. We're leaving, I announced. Right now. But Jake was already setting up his tent. It's just some old bones, he said. Probably been here since the 50s. What's it gonna do, get up and dance? I wanted to grab him and drag him back down the trail, but it was getting dark fast. The Appalachian Mountains at night are no place to be stumbling around lost. We'd have to wait until morning. We set up camp as far from the skeleton as possible, but I could still feel its empty eye sockets watching us. Emma had gone quiet, constantly glancing over her shoulder. David kept checking and rechecking his gear, nervous energy radiating from him. As we sat around our small camp stove eating dinner, Emma finally spoke up. I've been thinking about those tree carvings, she said. They're not Cherokee symbols. They're much older. Pre-Columbian, maybe even prehistoric. What do you think they mean? I asked. She hesitated. Warning markers. Boundary stones. Places where things aren't supposed to cross. We all heard it at the same time. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the trees around our campsite. Not the quick patter of deer hooves or the shuffle of bears. These were human footsteps. But they were wrong somehow. The rhythm was off, like someone walking with a severe limp. Step drag, step drag, step drag. Jake grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Hello? Is someone there? The footsteps stopped. We waited in absolute silence for what felt like hours. Finally, David whispered, maybe it was just. Something slammed into a tree directly behind my tent with tremendous force. The impact was so violent it shook the ground beneath us. All four of our flashlights swung toward the sound, but again, nothing there. Then we heard it. A voice calling from deep in the forest. Faint but unmistakably human. Help! Me! It was coming from the direction of an old mining trail that disappeared into a narrow hollow between two ridges. Emma's face had gone white. That's where the tree markings were thickest, she whispered. The voice came again, closer this time. Please! Help! Me! It was a man's voice, weak and desperate. My rational mind said it could be another hiker, injured and lost. But every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. Jake was already grabbing his pack. We have to help whoever that is. No, Emma said firmly. This is how they get you. The old stories, spirits that mimic human voices to lure people into the deep woods. They call them mimics or holofolk. But Jake was already heading toward the tree line. I'm not leaving someone to die out there. David reluctantly followed, and I couldn't let them go alone. Emma cursed and grabbed her flashlight. The mining trail was barely visible, overgrown with briars and fallen logs. Our flashlight beams created dancing shadows that seemed to move independently. The voice continued calling, always just ahead of us, always just out of sight. Help! Me! I'm hurt. 20 minutes into the hollow, we found the source. It was an old mine shaft, partially collapsed. The entrance was blocked by rusted iron bars, but there was a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. And from somewhere deep in that black pit, the voice was calling. But now we could hear something else. The voice was echoing strangely, like it was coming from multiple directions at once. And underneath it was another sound, a wet, sliding noise, like something large moving through mud. David shone his light through the bars. Hello? We're here to help. The voice stopped. In the sudden silence, we could hear our own breathing, our hearts pounding. Then, from the depths of the mine, came a different sound. Laughter. Not human laughter. Something that might have been human once, but had been changed by decades of darkness and isolation. It echoed up from the mine shaft, growing louder and more hysterical. We need to leave, I said. Right now. But as we turned to go, our flashlights illuminated something that made my blood freeze. Fresh footprints in the mud. Bare human feet, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow. And they led from the mine entrance back toward our camp. We ran. Branches tore at our clothes and faces as we crashed through the forest. Behind us, that inhuman laughter followed, seeming to come from the trees themselves. I could hear something large moving parallel to us, keeping pace easily despite our panicked flight. When we burst back into our campsite, we found our tents destroyed. Not torn by animals, shredded systematically, almost artistically. Our supplies were scattered, and written in the mud beside the creek was a single word. Mine. The car, David gasped. We need to get to the car. But we were 3 miles from the trailhead, and something was hunting us in the darkness. Our only choice was to huddle together until dawn, taking turns keeping watch. I took the first shift while the others tried to rest in what remained of our gear. The forest was alive with sounds now, whispers in languages I didn't recognize, branches snapping as something heavy moved through the undergrowth, and always that step-drag rhythm circling our camp. At 3 a.m., during Emma's watch, we heard the voice again. But this time, it was Jake's voice. Guys? Where did everyone go? Sarah? I'm lost. We looked at each other in horror. Jake was sitting right beside us. That's not me, he whispered. The fake Jake called again, closer now. Please, I can't find the camp. It's so dark. And then we heard David's voice coming from a different direction. Over here. I found something. But David was gripping my arm so tightly I could feel his fingernails digging in. Then my own voice joined the chorus, calling from the trees, Help me. Something's got me. Emma's voice followed, why won't you answer? I'm scared. 4 voices, all perfect mimics of our own, calling from the darkness around us. But we were all accounted for, huddled together in the ruins of our campsite. The voices grew more frantic, more desperate. They began overlapping, creating a hellish chorus of our own pleas for help. And underneath it all, that wet sliding sound was getting closer. We spun around. Standing at the edge of our small clearing was a figure. It might have been human once. The general shape was right, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But it was wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. Its skin was pale and gleamed wetly in our flashlight beams. And its face? It had no face of its own. Instead, it was cycling through our faces, one after another. Jake's concerned expression, David's determined frown, Emma's frightened eyes, my own confused stare. Like a broken television flipping channels. When it spoke, it used all our voices at once. Why won't you help us? We've been calling so long. That's when I understood. This thing, whatever it was, had been mimicking lost people for decades. Luring good Samaritans into the deep woods, adding their voices to its collection. And Jay Morrison, the miner we'd found, had probably been one of its early victims. The creature took a step toward us, and I could see that its feet matched the strange tracks we'd found. Behind it, more shapes moved in the darkness. It wasn't alone. We ran again. This time we didn't try to follow the trail. We crashed straight through the forest, guided only by the faint glow of distant highway lights beyond the ridge. Branches slashed our faces and arms, roots tried to trip us, but we didn't dare stop. Behind us, our own voices called out in perfect mimicry of pain and terror. The sounds followed us for what felt like hours, always just close enough to keep us running. When we finally stumbled onto the main road, bloody and exhausted, it was dawn. A passing trucker stopped and called the police when he saw our condition. The authorities found our campsite, found Jay Morrison's remains, found evidence of our panicked flight through the forest. But they never found any trace of the creatures that had hunted us. The official report stated that we'd panicked after discovering the skeleton and fled through the woods at night, injuring ourselves in our haste. Stress-induced hallucinations, they said. Group hysteria. They sealed off the old mine shaft for safety reasons. Case closed. But I know what we encountered in those mountains. And I know it's still there, waiting in the hollow between the ridges. Still calling with the voices of everyone it's collected over the decades. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I swear I can still hear them. Distant voices carried on the wind, calling for help that will never come. The Cherokee were right to mark those boundaries. Some things should stay buried in the deep places of the mountains. Last week, I heard that 3 college students went missing while hiking in Pisgah National Forest. Their car was found at the same trailhead where we'd started our trip. The police are calling it another tragic camping accident. But I know better. I know that somewhere in the darkness of that hollow, those creatures have 3 new voices to add to their collection. 3 more people calling out in the night, begging for help from anyone foolish enough to listen. And the worst part? Sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can hear my own voice among them. Still calling from those mountains, still asking for help. But I'm here. I'm safe. So whose voice is that, echoing through the Appalachian hollows? Maybe some parts of us never really leave the darkness. Maybe we're all still there, trapped in that endless night, calling out with voices that will never be answered.